I'll move a little closer for you back up.
Ready? Okay, first off, we'd like to thank you so much for coming. It's like really great to have a nice experience to be able to talk to someone and ask them, because you're probably going to help us out a lot.
Oh.
So first off, how old are you?
I'm 43.
43?
Yes.
Okay.
I have to think about it. Once you get this age, you're like, wait, how am I? Yeah. I'll be 44 in a month.
Okay, where were you born? Happy early birthday.
Oh, thank you. I was born in LA in a town called Tarzana.
What brought you to San Diego?
I moved down here to go to San Diego State for college, and I did a lot of traveling, but I never desired to live back in Los Angeles.
How do you think your family helped shape your identity?
Well, your family has a huge influence on your identity. There's my ethnic heritage, first of all. So my dad's side is Ukrainian and Jewish, and my mom's side, my mom was actually born in England, and so my maternal grandmother is English, and my mom was born outside of a town called Liverpool, where the Beatles are from. My maternal grandfather, he passed when I was 2, so I didn't really know him, but he was born in Mexico, was ethnically Spanish and German, and was serving in World War II, which is where he met my grandmother and married her, and then my mom was born before they came to the United States. So growing up, I had an extreme interest in social justice because I'd grown up learning about the Holocaust and knowing that it was actually a genocide during World War I in Ukraine called the Bolshevik Revolution, and that's actually what caused my father's side of the family to emigrate to the United States. So that was actually 20 years before World War II, before the Holocaust. So genocide and the Holocaust is not unique. So there's been many instances of genocide. So that's what got my father's family here. And my mother's side of the family, being a war bride is a very famous thing. A lot of American soldiers married British women when they were stationed in England. So growing up, I think I really had an affinity for British music and loved and wanted to live overseas, and that drove me to study in England during my junior year at college. And then my dad had lived in Germany, which was interesting because he spent a year overseas. He went to UCLA, and he spent a year overseas living in Germany about 20 years after the Holocaust. So as a Jewish American studying in Germany 20 years after the Holocaust. So, I grew up with stories and an understanding of that ethnic background of mine, so it definitely drove huge amounts of decisions that I made moving forward.
Were you, do you have any brothers or sisters?
No, so I was an only child. My parents divorced when I was in 3rd grade. And in 4th grade, my dad met who's now my stepmom, and her 2 daughters became my sisters, so I'm actually very close with both of my stepsisters, which is funny because we're a very LA story, so I don't know if you kids understand this, but part of LA culture, especially during the 1980s, most of my friends' parents were divorced. That was just kind of the LA story. And so my stepmom, my dad is her 3rd husband, so she had my sister Jennifer, who now goes by Firestar, with her first husband, and then she remarried and had my sister Tiffany, and then that didn't work out, and then she met my dad. So Tiffany is about 6 years younger than me, and Firestar is 1 year older than me, so we're kind of the same age. So when I was in 5th grade, I guess, I gained 2 sisters. But none of us lived together. My older sister lived with my dad and my stepmom. I lived mostly with my mom, and my younger sister mostly lived with her dad. So we've gotten very close as adults, but we didn't get to like experience growing up as sisters in the same house.
Is there any like really important events that like helped shape who you are and
For sure. That's a very loaded question. I mean, I think when we look at our lives, right, difficult times and adversity helps to shape us, especially if we get through it. But there's also positive events that help shape us, right? So there's 4 kind of turning points in my life, because this, I didn't know we were going to get this deep. So there's 4 things that I think were really challenging for me and definitely shaped how I cope and how I chose to move forward and get through these things, because not everybody gets through things, right? So when I was 8, my parents divorced, so that was tough. When I was you guys are 8th graders?
yeah.
So it was November of my 8th grade year that my father called me, and I was at my mom's, and I tried not to be at my dad's that much because there was a lot of screaming and yelling all the time. And my dad said, I need to come pick you up. And mind you, before my parents got divorced, I was a daddy's girl. Like, my dad was my bud, okay? And then when he met my stepmom, it just wasn't that way anymore. And like I said, lots of screaming and yelling. So I was very angry with my dad and not spending a lot of time at my dad's house. So anyway, he had to break to me over the phone. And my dad, he's a lawyer. He's very intelligent. He's UCLA alumni. I went to private school K through 8, so I had a very privileged start to my life. But there was, family was not stable. And so my dad had to break to me over the phone that he and my stepmom were addicted to cocaine. And that explained a lot of the behavior that I didn't want to be around. Now it made sense. And now I was supposed to empathize and support them as they got sober. And honestly, it made me more angry than ever. But I can say, looking back, that while I think they still have tons of problems and I deal with it much better now as an adult, that kept me straight growing up, right? Because I saw the people they became during the 3 years of my experience of them as drug addicts. And drug addiction, like, it doesn't end when you get sober. There's a lot of dynamics behind it, and it's really hard. I don't know if you know anyone who's a drug addict. We love them, but they're very difficult people to be around. So I think that almost kind of kept my head straight, because my parents weren't really around for me growing up, but I knew there was a certain amount of trouble not to get into, because I'd seen firsthand what happens when you go down that path, right? So even though it was a very traumatic thing for me, it probably kept me more level-headed. So through high school, when I was really young, the emphasis was on education. I was in private school. My dad was UCLA alumni and a lawyer. All of a sudden, I get into high school, and it's like, psh, nobody cares about what I'm doing in school anymore. But what they did care about is, we can't give you any money ever for anything. So if you want any money at all, you have to get a job. So I started working when I was 14, and I certainly learned a lot about work and responsibility and how to work, but I also missed out on being a scholar and taking AP classes and doing all of that. So working led me to I got to have a car, and I'm making money, so I'll pay for it. And so I got a car, literally I turned 16 and got a car. I definitely needed parent help, but they were supportive, which I look back now and think is kind of crazy. my son will not be getting a car when he's 16 because it's a huge responsibility. And I got in a really bad accident my senior year. And my best friend was really badly hurt. And so I was already accepted to San Diego State senior year, so it obviously ruined the rest of my high school year. And so when I left for college, I just wasn't in a real good space. You know, I was traumatized. But after a lot of processing, I also learned to value human life and how much human life is so important and fragile and quick, it just could be gone in a moment. And so I really felt like, the world was trying to teach me a lesson about valuing life, and I think it really made me want to become a good human being. But then there's some wonderfully positive things that have shaped my life. I feel very blessed and privileged that I got to go to private school. I've worked in San Diego Unified for 18 years, and we do some amazing things in this district, but we have obstacles as a huge public school institution. And I find myself someday if I get to be, a principal, I know this district well enough to know where I have flexibility and where I don't. And I had such an amazing, and that's truly my private school experience, was a huge part of what kept me able to cope as challenging things came my way, because I had such an amazing foundation at school. I had great learning atmosphere, great friends, sports, we didn't have to go join leagues. We had after school sports right after, so my parents worked late and weren't around, but I got to play in sports and learn all these different sports, and that gave me confidence and built friendships, and so that was amazing. And still, with all the drama with my parents throughout the years, I still maintained a lot of good conversations with my dad, and he got me really interested in history. I know it sounds really geeky, but honestly, in high school, one of my favorite things to do, because my dad wasn't always a good parent, but one of the advantages about that is he'd get home late, lawyering all day, and then I got to stay up till midnight with him watching Holocaust documentaries, right? So it got me very interested in history. It got me to be a social justice advocate. I would hear his stories about his year overseas in Germany, which to this day is probably my dad's highlight year. So that led me to want to live overseas. So I went and studied in England when I was in school. My love of history, and then I was at San Diego State in the mid-'90s, and the tech industry was about to take off. I started university in 92, and 95 is when the World Wide Web came out, right? So in 1992, my counselor at San Diego State was like, there's no jobs for you to do, so just study whatever you want. And I'm like, really? Just study whatever I want? Shouldn't I look for something that's going to make me money? And this counselor was like, there's no way to make money. The economy's terrible. And I'm like, okay, well then I'm going to study ancient history. And so I majored in classics, which is the study of ancient Greece and Rome. And what was amazing about that is all these answers, coming from mixed religious backgrounds. And my parents were not really observant at all. So I went to Catholic school. I had a Jewish dad. My mother was Protestant, not practicing. So, I grew up with a knowledge of religion, but not with being part of being observing religion. So I kind of grew up with a certain moral standard, but this flexibility, and I had a lot of questions. And so I felt like studying the classics gave me a lot of answers that I needed. And so it also, I think, helped me. My major at university, truthfully, helped me. There were two things that got me through the trauma of that car accident. it was studying the classics, and I was so lucky that one of my really close friends, he owned a sailboat, and he taught me how to sail. And we wound up becoming roommates in college, and I wound up fixing him up with his wife, and today we're still great friends. So his wife is a teacher in our district, and I've known him since high school. And it's funny because I barely talk to him now. Like, we get the kids together, and him and, you know, my girlfriend, his wife, like, we gossip, blah, 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 and I hardly even, hey, what's up? But the 2 years that we were roommates, and he taught me how to sail, and we would go sailing every day, and plus, as a female, having a strong, athletic, competent male who didn't want to date me, who just wanted to be my friend, was really a blessing. And so I think that having that friendship and being able to learn to sail and connect with nature, and there's so much you have to learn to sail a boat. And so that, combined with studying the classics, got me to a really good place. So then 3 years after the car accident, and 3 years of being away from the craziness that was my home life, I was in this amazing space, and I got on a plane and went by myself to go live overseas. And the second I got on the plane, I don't know if you've ever been on a massive jet. So there's like a middle row, and then there's 2 side rows. I was seated in the middle of the middle. So it wasn't going to be a really super comfortable flight for 12 hours to England. The plane hadn't taken off yet, and one of the flight attendants comes up to me, and I'm on Virgin Atlantic, which is British-run airline, and 2 really important things happened on that flight. First of all, I looked at the magazine before takeoff and found out that Jerry Garcia from the Grateful Dead had just died. I don't know if you kids know who the Grateful Dead is. They're a really influential band from the 1960s. And so they're before my time even. But I always kind of said, I thought that they were like too old for me. I didn't understand. And like, I got introduced to them right before I left to go to England. And I thought, when I get back from England, I'm going to go see the Grateful Dead. So then, like, you know, I find out the lead singer died, so that was kind of a bummer. But then the flight attendant was like, excuse me, would you mind if we move your seat? You can't get worse than this. Sure. She goes, right, here's your seat assignment. And, you know, so I take the ticket, and I'm like, and I look at her, and I'm like, should I go on the other side of the curtain? And she's like, yeah, that's right. You've been bumped up to first class. Sweet. So now my first experience going to live overseas, my very first beginning of that whole trip is I'm now in first class on Virgin Atlantic. It's going to be a good year. And it was.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier you said that your parents weren't really there for you. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that like formed your identity? Like, how did you have to do things?
It still forms my identity. I'm a mom today. I have 2 beautiful boys. And I love my parents. My mom actually lives with us. And now that my husband really knows my mom, and he already kind of knew my crazy dad and stepmom, and he loves them too, but he's like, I don't know how you wound up so normal. But you know what? A huge part of what grounds me is, one, I just always knew my parents. Like, I didn't always know, but probably when I got home from living overseas, I came to the realization that I love my parents and they're my parents, but there's going to be only limits on how they can be there for me. So I need to learn what those limits are and compensate by taking care of myself. So I think it definitely helped me to gauge the kind of risks that I took. You know, like I'm adventurous and I like to take risks, and at the same time, I reached a point in my life where I'm like, there's certain risks I just can't take because I don't have a support system behind me that is required. So, like, honestly, at one point, I wanted to, because I was studying the classics, one of the projects I got involved in when I was living in England is I did a research project on seafaring in the ancient Mediterranean. And I discovered that there's, massive amounts of shipwrecks buried underneath the Mediterranean Sea. And that the Greeks and the Romans and the Egyptians and the Phoenicians and all the other folks who used to sail back then, like they would have clay jars filled with olive oil and wine and grapes and amazing things. And I'm also a very outdoorsy, adventurous person. And so when I got back from living overseas, I got certified as a scuba diver. And my dream was, I'm like, I want to become a nautical archaeologist. I want to dive under the ocean and discover shipwrecks. And oh my goodness, what if I found an amphora jar that was still sealed? And there was either wine or olive oil that was like 2,000 years old in this jar. Like, that became like something I really wanted to do. And then as I did more research, we have 2 institutions in the United States that can really support this work. So in Mystic, Connecticut, there's a professor whose last name is Ballard, Dr. Ballard, and he does amazing work with underwater archaeology. So, like, he's been a huge part of researching the Titanic since it's been sunk, right? So I wanted to go study in Mystic, Connecticut under Dr. Ballard. But, like, that means going to live in Connecticut as a Californian. That means paying for graduate school. It sounds like a really outlandish career, like, who do you meet who spends their entire career and makes money, like, diving for shipwrecks under the Mediterranean and adventuring around the world, right? So, because I didn't have that support system, I decided it was too much of a risk for me to think about pursuing that as a career. And so I stayed here, and I don't regret it. Like, I did my plan B. And what's super cool is the worlds are starting to come together because our district just got a grant to work with a company, an organization called Blue Tech, and they do all this, anything having to do with technology in the ocean. And so, like, I love Greek mythology. That was part of my major, right, is studying Greek mythology. And I don't know if you kids know the story of Jason and Medea. Okay, well, it's an incredible myth. Jason and the Golden Fleece. Jason was the captain of the ship, the Argonaut, and he took the Argonaut on big adventures around the Mediterranean to try and find the Golden Fleece. Like, that was the thing. But if you are a person who studies Greek mythology and you're like, well, what's real and what's not real? The reality is, ships as described in the myths existed. People took these journeys. If you retrace the Greek mythology, then it looks like this ship that was discussed would have sailed around the Aegean Sea, around the Black Sea, in modern-day Ukraine, which I'm ethnically half Ukrainian, right? So I'm like, whoa, that comes together. So, and Medea was his wife. And I'll spare you the story behind their marriage. But when Dr. Ballard created this underwater technology to find shipwrecks that were way too deep down in the ocean to scuba dive, like, you have to only send machinery because human beings cannot go 1,000 feet under the water. The pressure of the ocean you just can't. So the Navy and Professor Ballard and his team have worked together to develop, probably they have new technology now, but 20 years ago it was Jason and Medea, and they were these extendable arms that would come off the submarines, and you'd have to learn all this technology to, search for shipwrecks under the water. So it's really neat now that our district is so focused on STEAM because, history gets left out of that narrative all the time. And as you can see, I'm very passionate about history, but I see that history and technology can totally come together. So I'm like, maybe somewhere in the back of my mind, this dream of mine to be involved in searching for shipwrecks under the Mediterranean, like it might still happen after all these years.
How is your health?
My health?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm lucky, but the downside is honestly I have a new job with the district, and I have 2 young children. So every minute that I'm not working and my job, honestly, keep this on the down low. It's too much for one person, my job. And so I work, but I love what I do, and I think honestly, not to like hurt anybody's feelings, but I think I have one of the most important jobs in the school district.
What is your job?
So my official title, I'm the program manager for History, Social Science, Ethnic Studies, and Gear Up. And the Gear Up portion is about 20% of my job, and History, Social Science, and Ethnic Studies is 80% of my job. But truthfully, that used to be 100% of my job, and I wish it still was, because I'm good at it, and I was very blessed to get noticed and to get a promotion, but it's also it's a lot, and so I really I love history, social science, so I do workshops for teachers. So do you guys have Mrs. Hazelton?
Yes.
She comes to my workshops. She's awesome, and Mrs. Lattimore and Miss Doheny. So I work with a lot of your history, social science teachers, and Mr. Gonzalez, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think those are the 4 teachers that. And there's one more from your site. Her first name is Donna. I can't remember.
Samara?
Maybe. Can't remember.
Does she have blonde hair?
I think so. But Mrs. Lattimore and Mrs. Hazelton are the 2 teachers I've probably worked with most at your school. And so I do a lot of workshops, and so I try to introduce the teachers whenever I find out about a new resource that can make teaching and learning history more fun, and also ethnic studies. So all this work about identity, like that's part of ethnic studies, right? And so I think Mrs. Hazelton this year was really working on trying to bring some of that identity work into her social studies classroom. So that's a huge part of what I do. And so honestly, I'm super busy, but I came today because of the title of the project, Identity Project. I'm like, I'm being asked to come to this. How can I not come to this when this is the work that I do?
Cameron, can I see the green?
No. Yeah.
So I also have 2 little boys. And my youngest is 21 months old, and he's my late in life blessing. He was a whoopsie baby, so I was 42 when he was born. So my older son is 8 now. So if and when you ever become parents, when your kids hit 5, there's a freedom you have as a parent with your children when they turn 5. Like, you can start doing stuff with them. They don't need to take naps anymore. They're old enough to understand certain things. It's a really freeing moment when your children turn 5.
Yeah.
And do you have younger siblings?
I have a sister.
How old's your sister?
7.
Okay, so you remember probably then she was 5 not that long ago. So when kids turn 5, just your world opens up in terms of what you can do with your children. So I had just reached that place with my older son, and my husband and I were bummed that we didn't have a second, but we were coming to terms with it. And right when I was about to have the conversation with him, it's okay, it never happened again. Let's just move on. I was pregnant. So I love my younger one to pieces, but we had to start all over again with babyhood. So literally every second of my life that I'm not working, I'm being a mom. So, you asked about my health earlier. I don't eat as well as I should, and I don't get enough exercise. And these were things that were coming back into my life as my older son turned 5. So I'm very lucky with my health, but I'm getting all these warning signs because people my age, things start happening. And so, you know, I'm really aware that I need to make a shift in my life because really in my heart of hearts, I'm a really outdoorsy, active person. So I need to figure out how to make sure that I'm living a healthy lifestyle.
I'm just gonna ask you, which one of these helped shape, was one of the most important things?
I was worried you were going to ask a question like that because it's going to be impossible for me to answer. I mean, I can tell you what hasn't been important, okay? Like, for me, gender identity wasn't important because I identify with my assigned sex as a female. And so, and I've definitely experienced, like, you know, women versus men. I mean, I've experienced a little bit of that, but when you're in education, it's very equitable. So I didn't choose a career where men necessarily have an advantage over women. I think educators are generally very moral people, like compared with a lot of other people in the world. So I've been very lucky to not have to deal with a lot of the challenges that women deal with or that transgender people deal with. But I definitely feel like a part of my work involves protecting and advocating the rights of people who don't necessarily identify with their assigned gender. And also sexual orientation has not been a huge part of my identity because, or part of what shaped my identity because, again, I'm not part of the LGBT community, so I haven't had to deal with the challenges that our LGBT community deals with. My older stepsister is gay, and so I've seen some challenges through her. Looking at this, I would say probably education is probably the single largest influence on that I have chosen, right? Because your family you're born into. So obviously my family has had a huge part in shaping my identity, and I explained that to you. But I would say education probably is the second biggest part of my identity because that's the part of my identity that I chose, sort of, because my parents started me in private school that I didn't choose. But I explained what a blessing that was because of the type of school I went to. Certainly, geography has been huge. You know, growing up in LA and San Diego is a very different experience from growing up in Bristol, England, where I lived. So that was a really amazing experience to live in a completely different climate and a completely different culture, and you think, oh, well, they speak English. Still, it's a very different culture. So I had that experience to live in a different country and to be a foreigner and to understand what it's like, how to separate the part of me that's me and the part of me that was American.
If you don't mind me asking, how did you meet your husband?
So I had just finished my teaching credential, and it was, let's see, I think it was like May of 2001. So the school year was ending. I was subbing. I finished my teaching credential like January of 2001. I was substitute teaching for the district. It's now like May. I'm like, the school year's ending. I'm not going to have any work, right? Because teachers aren't going to call me to sub. And I didn't have a contract yet as a full-time teacher. So I got a job as a camp counselor at the Mission Bay Aquatic Center. And I was instructing kayaking to kids. And my husband was instructing windsurfing. And so we met at the Mission Bay Aquatic Center, being camp counselors.
How is your economic status?
I'm definitely privileged. You know, I'm when you start off as a teacher, it's hard, but once you hit that 5-year mark, because your salary goes up a little bit every year, once you hit that 5-year mark, you've if you had to take student loans, you've been able to pay off a lot of those, and you get raises every year. So once you hit that 5-year mark, and you have really good health benefits, so once you hit that 5-year mark, you're doing pretty well. Honestly, I make more money than I thought I would make because I did do my admin credential, but I didn't expect to become an administrator yet. And so getting a promotion as program manager was, like I said, it's a huge blessing. So money-wise, I'm very, I would say privileged for sure because, I've served in this district for 18 years, and I was a middle school teacher for 14 years, and I've had kids that are homeless, I've had kids that are impoverished, I've worked at 3 different school sites, and so I've seen, I've seen some of the situations that my students are in, and I wish I could save them all.
How do you see yourself?
Overall. You know what, I can honestly say I've had some tough times, and I've been lucky enough that I had access to whatever tools I needed to get through those tough times and to turn adversity into positivity. I told you my plan A job, my dream job is a nautical archaeologist, but becoming an educator, because honestly, I studied the classics, so I wanted to teach 6th grade, I wanted to teach ancient history. As it turns out, I found that wasn't the only thing I wanted to do, and so now I do really history, social science, TK through 12. My identity is wrapped up in my job a lot. So I feel very lucky that I'm doing work that I'm so proud of. At the same time, I have a sense of urgency because I'm the only person at the district level who does this work. And, I think it's really important work, and so I have a sense of urgency around it. And it's funny that you asked, because the one problem when you have a job that you love is that if your friends don't have jobs that they love, they don't want to talk about work. And you're like, well, what have I got in my life? I've got my kids and I've got my work, which I love. So overall, I'm proud of the person that I've become, but I do need to work on finding balance. Because right now I'm working too hard, and and I have little ones, so that kind of puts restrictions on certain things that you like to do. Like, my husband bought a mountain bike and gets to go mountain biking, and we can't both do that because what do you do with a 20-month-old baby? And I don't have the kind of mom who would watch him. So, yeah.
Is there anything extra you would like to tell us?
Yes. Figure out what your passions are and chase after them. There's an old, from Indian proverb, and it says, if you chase after the goddess of wisdom, the goddess of wealth will get jealous and chase after you. And I never thought that I would be, it's not that I make $1 million, but I make more money than I thought I would when I first went into becoming a teacher, and I never really looked for it. I chased after ancient history. I chased after, once I became a teacher, teaching ancient history. Once I was in the classroom and I had the responsibility of your beautiful faces, I realized teaching a subject isn't enough. You have to connect with your students and develop relationships and recognize when you need to bring in support, you know? Like, I'm the kind of teacher, the second I firmly believe that human beings love to learn. Now, adults get stuck with a lot of baggage, but you children, if you get into my classroom in September and you don't love to learn, and I'm not able to help you within a month to love to learn in my classroom, then usually there's something going on and the needs of the kids aren't being met. And since it's not necessarily in my job description to counsel kids, I like to make sure that if I recognize kids need help, that I bring in the counselors and the supports. So going back to chase after the goddess of wisdom and the goddess of wealth will get jealous and chase after you. Since I decided to become a teacher, I poured my whole heart into being as good a teacher as I could be. And with that, one after another opportunities has come my way, without me trying to seek those opportunities. So don't give up on your dreams, however outlandish they seem.
Do you think your nationality helps shape your identity?
Well, for sure. You know, I mean, I'm American, and you know, as you really get into ethnic studies, you guys are studying U.S. history right now. Let me ask you, have there been some things that have come out about our history that have been a little surprising to you?
Not yet for me.
What are you guys studying right now?
Right now we are studying.
What part of U.S. history?
Revolutionary War.
Yeah.
Okay.
Studying like Battle of Bunker Hill.
All right. So what's the purpose of this war? Why did the colonists choose to fight in a war against the mother country?
Gain freedom.
To get freedom.
They really didn't like how I think the king or queen of there
Mm-hmm.
ruled, and so they moved to there to like have freedom from that.
What were some of the things they didn't like about how the king ruled?
They gave them lots of taxes.
Do you know why King George was taxing the colonists?
Because after winning the French and Indian War, they had a lot of debt, and they needed a lot of money.
Okay. So what was the result of the French and Indian War?
The British won, but they had to find a way to get like money.
Okay, so whose side were the colonists on in that war? Right. And so why did Britain and America fight in that war together? What was the purpose of it?
To get more land for the colonists.
Okay. Did anyone live on that land?
The Indians.
Okay. So have you ever really thought about that? Have you ever really thought about the colonists in partnership with the British were fighting to gain land that was already belonged to people who were living there? Right? So then they win, yay! And then Britain says, okay, look, that was a really costly endeavor. So we're going to draw this line of proclamation and let you know that if you want to settle west of there, we're not going to support you in defending you against the Indians because we're tapped out. And in the meantime, we need to make up for some of this money and tax you to make up for the cost of the war, right? Okay, well, then you need to give us representation in Parliament. And the British said, no, you need to pay for the war that we fought, but we're not going to give you representation.
I think the media is important.
Yeah. But then the colonists, right? So they rebel because the colonists want freedom. Meanwhile, who's running the plantations in the South? Who's working the plantations in the South?
Slaves.
Okay. So let me get this straight. We want freedom so that we can take freedom from others. We want the freedom to take others' freedom. So we have an amazing country, but you need to be aware.
It wasn't perfect.
You need to be aware of the truth. Who wrote our Declaration of Independence?
Was it Benjamin?
Nope.
Thomas Jefferson?
Yes. Right? We, the people of the United States, or no, that's the Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, not women, are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of property, unless you're African. Because what Thomas Jefferson also wrote in the state of Virginia, his notes on the state of Virginia, is that if by definition you're 12% African, then you're automatically an enslaved person in Virginia. From the pen of Thomas Jefferson.
Did he remove that from the...
So there's a different set of writings from Thomas Jefferson called Notes on the State of Virginia. And in these writings, he defines what a slave is going to be. And that began the definition of freedom even before we won the American Revolution.
To pull, like, not to be rude, but to pull away from that, do
Mhm.
you think media helped shape you, or is like important in your life right now?
I think it's important in my life because I think that the media has some positive and negative benefits that influence people's decisions. I don't really know how I could step outside of who I am and measure how much the influence the media has over me directly, but I know that there are a lot of people not as informed as I am for whom the media has a tremendous influence over, and those people vote and make decisions on behalf of my country, which in turn impact me. So in that way, maybe I can be immune to some of the messaging from the media because I'm very educated, but if not all people have that awareness, then the media has a tremendous impact on their decisions, and their decisions have a tremendous impact on me.
And before you said that education was the second most important, what do you think would be the first thing?
As my identity,
Yeah.
honestly, I think that's what's so complex about identity, because I think you have to pull it all together. You know, it's your life experiences, it's your education or lack of education, it's your family. There's so much, and yet I challenge every American, so I'm going to challenge you kids to do this, is to constantly figure out who you are. And don't get stuck in one specific identity. Because I think what happens is as you get older, your identity gets so much more complex. And if you don't have space, if you are not aware enough of your identity, then learning, I think if you do not have a good awareness of who you are, then you will put walls up to learning new things, because I think human beings, if they don't have a strong sense of identity, feel very threatened with new information, right? So to be able to talk with you about, I love this country, and there's a reality that our government was founded on a narrative of some injustice, to be polite. And I think it's your generation's job to right some of the wrongs. And so I'm going to throw this all back on you, and that is get comfortable in who you are so that as you learn new things and you change, that does not threaten you. Okay? Get comfortable enough with your own identities so that you're open-minded, and when you hear new information, you can hear it without feeling like it's taking away who you are. Because what I see in this country today is we don't want to listen to each other because we're so afraid that someone who has a different perspective is going to steal me away from being who I am.
Do you have any traditions that affected your identity?
You know, a lot, but you know, growing up in a mixed religious background, like we grew up celebrating Christmas and Hanukkah, Passover and Easter. I love traditions, and I love bringing in new traditions and preserving old ones, and at the same time, I don't always take the time to that it takes to like really make traditions special.
Let's ask one more. Let's ask one more question.
What are your like main interests and hobbies? Like, I know you said those.
No, there's so many things I love to do that I just don't have space to do in my life right now. Sailing, rollerblading, hiking, traveling. Water skiing is probably my favorite, except for snow skiing because that's my next favorite. So I have tons of things that I love to do. Cycling. I have a road bike. I want a mountain bike. I really love to do all of that. It's just that I'm working a little too hard and have too young children. You know, I would get done with a day of teaching and then I could go for a bike ride because I lived in Pacific Beach. But then I had babies and moved inland, and you know, so things change, and I know that I will get back to a point in my life where I can do those things more often. But my kids need to get old enough that they can do them with me. Yes.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and I just wish you all the best. I think this is an amazing project your teacher's having you do, and I hope that you move forward, and I'd like to see what you guys do. Can I give you my email address so that you'll send me what you do?
Oh, it's right here. It's right there. We're gonna like write our papers and we're gonna present all of our papers on that day.
The day before my birthday. Fabulous. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Also, which school do you teach?
Well, so I work at the central office now. I'm not